Okay, welcome to the Webby Sports Inc. 2017 American League regular season wins selections. I have two of them for you today. My name is Webby, Scott Webb. I go by Webby. Anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to pick two of these out and try to get some successes we have had in the past. Last year we had four plays and all four of them hit 4-0 on the season total wins, and the year before that we were 3-1. So we have had some good success here. And in the American League, I have two selections for you today, and we're going to start with the idea of where this stuff comes from and how I sort of predict them and where they play out at. But the first thing we're going to do is look at what the Atlantis Casino and Resort came out with, and the date on that was as of February the 10th. And on February the 10th, they had some, and you can go to my website. I have at webbysportsinc.com. Look at the inside the Batter's Box blog, and inside of that will be the Atlantis projections of their season total wins and what the Vegas line number started at. And I have selected a couple of the games, and one of the teams we're going to look at today is the Kansas City Royals. And that date, they had the Kansas City Royals at 80.5 of the wins total for the year. And as of today, I printed it off of bookmaker.com, and Bookmaker has the Kansas City Royals at 75.5. So from 80.5 to 75.5. So we're going to use the 75.5 number as it is more current. And it's one of the lines I can actually bet on. So that's going to be the line that I'm using. I'm using 75.5 as the number for the Kansas City Royals. So as we talk about the Kansas City Royals, the one thing that I first do is look at how did they perform last year to what their projection was for the over and the under. And last year, the projection for the over and the under on the Kansas City Royals was 85 wins. So last year was 85 wins. This year is 75.5. So is this team really going to be 10 games worse than what they were last year? And then secondly, how did they perform last year? Well, last year they won 81 games. They lost 81 games. They did finish under that 85 projected total that they had a year ago. So 81 is a target number that you want to sort of work off of, and they're at already 75.5. So they are under that number. And that seems a little bit like that's a lot of number. I mean, that's 6 games under in a division that is not necessarily any better on the bottom end. You know, when you start to look at some of the teams in that division, like your Minnesotas and the Chicago White Sox, for example, who even got worse. So I don't expect that. And the Detroit Tigers, that the Tigers didn't do anything to get any better. So they didn't improve their pitching, they didn't improve their hitting. So you know, they won 86 games last year. So it's a matter of whether or not you think that the Kansas City Royals can at least hold their own to what they did a year ago. And in my opinion, we're going to look at how that plays out. So Fangraphs is one of the ones I use a lot of times for, you know, some projections and some different things, and it's not helping me out in this particular situation. The Fangraphs projection has them at 75 wins, which is third. They have them third behind Detroit, who has 81 wins, and then the Indians, who they projected 92 wins. So we're at 75, which is what the over and the underline is. And what I have noticed this year versus many of the years gone by, the Atlantis Casino has come out and they did their numbers. Probably not really looking at Fangraphs and what the projections come out to be, and Bookmaker has more or less went with almost, I wouldn't say to the T, but for the most part, what Fangraphs projections are. So we're going to be battling that, and in the years past, I think that's why we won so many games, was that we were using more of the Fangraphs projections to hit some of these numbers. But so let's look at the Kansas City Royals. So the Kansas City Royals last year, they won the 81 games, and we're going to look at something called the Pythagorean theory here. If I can get it in my notes on the right screen here, here we go. The Kansas City Royals with Pythagorean theory a year ago, they had a projection. Well, they won the 81 games, but Pythagorean theory is based off of the number of runs scored. How many wins should they have had if all things were kind of played out the way they were supposed to? And they should have won 77. So in theory, this team won 77. They're projected to win 75. So they're actually thinking they're going to be a couple games worse. They played above that number last year and won 81 games, which is sort of like what this team normally does. Now, the year before that, they won the World Series, so they played above their head again. So we're going to look at this team and kind of dig into them just a little bit and get a better understanding of why we're going to make a play on them. One of the reasons that I like the Kansas City Royals is that in their division they're going to win more games than they did a year ago. In the 2016 season, where is my numbers on those guys? The 2016 season, the Kansas City Royals, they were 46-30 in the division, so that they beat up the division. It wasn't like they were poor in the division. They just had a very, very poor road record. I mean, they were 13 games under on the road, and that's primarily because they're a poor offensive team a year ago. And we're going to look at that a little bit this year too. So last year, their offensive WAR rating for the Royals was only 13.9, and 13.9 is not very good when you consider that, like, one of the better teams, the Boston Red Sox, WAR was 33.9. The Cleveland Indians was 27.4, for example. The Detroit Tigers were 20.2. Those are bigger numbers, and they just found ways to win, but they didn't score much. And this year, their projection is going to be 17.1. So it's an improvement. Now, it's obviously not into the 20s, and it's not this great big improvement. But here's the good thing about the Kansas City Royals. Last year at third base, Mike Moustakas was injured for the entire season. He didn't play at all, and he's a big bat. He bats in the 260, 270 range. He hits a lot of home runs. He's got a good WAR rating. He's a positive WAR rating when it comes to offense, and they missed his bat in the middle of the lineup last year. They had to rely on guys like Cheslor Cuthbert and Christian Colon, and trying to get these guys to play well, and they were even using Whit Merrifield and guys like that to try to get offense. They also had a poor season out of Eric Hosmer last year, and Eric Hosmer is in a year this year where it's a contract year. He is one of those guys that, if you kind of follow along, is looking for a big contract, and he's a young player that has a lot of potential and has the opportunity to be a superstar. So if he can have one of those superstar kind of years, he's going to get paid. And you always want to bet on those kind of guys or having that kind of year. So I think you're going to see from the corner positions a much better offensive performance from the Royals. Salvador Perez is a great player when it comes to the idea of defense. He's not a terrible offensive player, but you look at the Royals, they have strength up the middle. Their catcher, and then they're looking at Alcides Escobar, who's one of their best defenders and shortstop in the league. And then at second base, they're going to be doing between Raul Mondesi and Christian Colon. So in the outfield, you're going to have Lorenzo Cain in center field this year. They do lose Jared Dyson. I don't know that Jared's going to be one of those players that's a huge loss to them. He's not an offensive player. He's more of a defensive player. But the Royals are going to pick up in left field Alex Gordon, who had a terrible year a year ago. He's going to have the same kind of year they did when they went to the World Series. So these guys typically will bounce back a little bit when they're down from one year and come back the next, unless they're on a decline. And I don't see Alex Gordon as on a decline. He's still in the middle stages of his career. He got a good contract. The Royals were nice to him a year ago, so he should pay them off for that. They did pick up George Soler from the Cubs in a trade, and I think he's going to be one of the guys that can provide a big bat. He doesn't necessarily hit for great average, and this team is one of the ones that are going to need to string some hits together, which is what they were really good at in the World Series year. So, but they can balance that off with Paul Orlando. So between the two of them, those guys can hold their own. But they did pick up Brandon Moss as well, and Brandon Moss is one of the guys that's going to be another run producer. So they have some run producers with your Solers and with your Mosses, and you look at your guys like Moustakas is back, and you got a Hosmer who is very motivated. So on the offensive side, which was their biggest weakness, they have improved quite a bit. And when it comes to the starting pitching, this is a team that has always struggled a little bit with the starting pitching, but they've made do. And I think that they found last year that they have an ace-type pitcher in Danny Duffy. He is going to be their number one again this year. He wasn't their number one to start last year. He was in the bullpen, and then he became their number one, and he pitched very well. Ian Kennedy is their number two, and Ian Kennedy pitched very well as well. He just doesn't get a lot of credit for what he did. He pitched 200 innings. And he's going to do that again. And those two pitchers are going to be a solid 1-2. They're not a superstar 1-2, but they're at least a solid 1-2. But they did go out and they signed Jason Hamill from the Cubs, and that's going to be a good pickup for them. He's going to fit in as a number 3 or number 4 guy. That's going to put him right in the right spot, too, when he matches up against some of the other talent that's out there. Jason Vargas, who is coming back from injury, nice, solid left-handed pitcher. He's going to pick up some innings. He threw, I think, 6 games last year at the end of the season, so he's going to be in that either 4 or 3 hole kind too. And then they went out and they got Nate Carnes and they got Travis Wood from the Cubs, and those are also going to be players that I like compared to what they ended up having to do last year. So as they go along and where they're at, I see this team as being a team that will look at those 75 wins. They got 81 last year, and really I think that with the idea that the Minnesota Twins are still a young team that are counting on the players that they had from last year. The White Sox are in sell-off mode. The Detroit Tigers didn't do anything to improve. I see that the Kansas City Royals are a team that did improve. They're not nearly enough talent there to beat the Indians or catch them, but they do certainly have enough talent to beat 75.5 wins. So we are going to go with play number 1 as the Kansas City Royals being over 75.5 wins. And then play number 2 is in the same division, and we're going to talk about the Minnesota Twins. The Minnesota Twins last year were the worst team in terms of record in baseball. They only won, I think it was 59 games. Let's see what we got here. Minnesota Twins, they won 59 games and lost 103. As a matter of fact, they're the only team in the baseball last year to lose 100-plus games. And when you look at what their projection was from a year ago, their number that they were supposed to win was 79. So at 79 and they only won 59, their projection is that they lost 20 more games than they were projected to win. So they had a terrible season. Matter of fact, they started off 0-9. I mean, they lost their first 9 straight games, and it just didn't get any better from there. Their young talent, didn't hit the ball well enough. Now they scored some runs, but they didn't string hits together. This Buxton didn't play well in the first part of the year. Now he did play very well in the second part of the year, so maybe he's going to get off to a better start this year and help them out. But that means they still have to pick up quite a bit of games to go from 59 to 79. Now that was their projection, was 79. That was what Vegas had them at. Atlantis this year had Minnesota at the beginning at 70.5. So to go from 59 to 70.5, they're going to have to improve by 11.5 at the beginning. So is this team really 11.5 games better than they were? And then right now, currently, it is 74.5. So people have been betting them up a little bit, and 74.5 is the number. So we're going to go from 59 to 74.5. So that's a gain of 15 games, almost 16 games. And I just really don't see it. And I know that it said 79 for last year, so they're really down about 5 games from that. But looking at Pythagorean theorem on the Minnesota Twins, they should have only won 65 last year based on the runs that they scored. So they weren't that far away. They underperformed by 6 games, but still 65, and we're looking at 74 as an under. I think that you're looking at a team that really is going to be in that 70 range or less in terms of wins again. And then when you start to look at what did they do and what is their offense and defense and where are they at, they didn't do anything. They have Joe Mauer again at first base, Brian Dozier, who had his best year he's ever had at second base. They have a good defensive shortstop. Miguel Sano, is one of their younger players that could be a superstar, but he's got to quit striking out. In left field, the outfield, they got Rosario and Grossman, and these guys, they're just young players that they're not superstars. Byron Buxton is the guy that they're hoping for as their main weapon. Max Kepler did come on last year. He was a guy that played well for them. But who do we just talk about? I mean, their offense is going to have some runs in some games because they're going to hit a few home runs, but they strike out a lot. This is one of these teams that strikes out almost more than any other team. They're not a dynamic scoring offense when it comes to stringing runs together. If they don't hit for power, they're going to be in big trouble. But the worst part of this is that their pitchers, I mean, their pitching staff is nowhere near what's going to be required of a team to compete in this division. Irvin Santana is a quality starter, but he's not an ace, and they're going to use him like one. And then you have guys like Hector Santiago and Kyle Gibson, and they're bringing in Phil Hughes again, and Jose Barrios is the guy that they're trying to be a young superstar pitcher, but he really struggled last year. They had to send him back to the minors. Tyler Duffy was a player that was one of their starters that they had to put him back in the bullpen. So they don't even have a real closer. I mean, they got a closer. His name's Brandon Kinsler. So I'm looking at this team and I'm thinking, 70 wins is going to be a stretch, and we're at 74.5. So the two plays for the American League for the over and under in terms of team wins, Minnesota is going to be the second one, and we're going to do that as an under 74.5. So the two plays are Kansas City Royals over 75.5, and we are going to go with the Minnesota Twins at under 74.5. Thank you and good luck to you.